Fast Market, everybody. Kevin Hinks and Alex Coffey here for our Cash Tag segment. Now I'd like to bring in the co-founder of LikeFolio.com, Mr. Andy Swan, to the show. Andy, great day to talk about Spotify. Earnings tomorrow morning, and the Emmys were last night. I thought, I watched a little bit of it. I have a 17-year-old daughter. I watched a little bit of the Grammys. I thought some of it was actually kind of entertaining. Spotify, a huge player in music. What does your data tell us about Spotify, Andy?
Yeah, it's almost becoming the point where Spotify, seems to be the only player in music. When you look at Spotify versus competitors, I can remember it wasn't that long ago we were talking about Pandora, we were talking about Apple Music, and we were talking about Spotify, trying to figure out which one would be the winner. I think we can get out the crown and go ahead and polish that up. Spotify is dominating this group. The stock's up over 100% over the last year. I think LikeFolio data shows extremely strong momentum for Spotify. It's very interesting. You'd think when you got to the levels of I guess you could call it market saturation or at least market dominance among peers, that normally you would start to see a slowdown in that mention volume, a slowdown in that uptick in consumer demand. But with Spotify, we really don't see that very much. We continue to see Spotify innovating and getting people more and more addicted to their platform. This is a company that has audiobooks. They did an unbelievable job kind of taking over the podcast space. So really, if it's audio, and not to mention, the music business is phenomenal. So really, if it's audio, I think it's Spotify at this point. It's their game to lose. The fact that the company turned profitable with a little bit of a surprise in the last quarterly report, I think speaks to the executional excellence of the executives at this company. I think they do a phenomenal job reading the room in terms of what investors want to see and where interest rates and the market is heading. So overall, we see Spotify continuing to dominate both Apple Music and Pandora. We see no change in that. It's really just a matter of, how much will their customers accept price hikes into the future. We think they've got room to certainly expand on that. And we think, Spotify can be wildly profitable within 2 or 3 years. I think they're just getting started on that side of the equation.
Andy, doesn't it kind of have to be that way, though, if you're Spotify? Isn't it existential when you compare it to something like Apple? Like, Apple Music could literally just be removed and Apple's stock probably wouldn't even matter. It wouldn't even move.
Right. Right.
Spotify, if all of a sudden Apple Music was the primary place, could cease to exist in theory. So when I start thinking about this, I happen to use Apple Music just because it's included with my phone plan. But I'm the first to admit that I think the Spotify experience is superior. But to me, the experience is close enough that the not having to pay, free makes it worth it. So as we look at this, my question is how much is this kind of like how Netflix had to look at its space? Like Disney had its parks. Disney has its, its brand, IP that it can monetize. Netflix had to make streaming work. It was existential. The same way that Chewy has to make pet online work because Amazon's selling those products, but they don't really care if Chewy wants to try to steal some of that business. For Spotify, it had to be success, and so far it looks like it has been.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the analogy to Netflix is, really the analogy to use here. And I think Spotify's in much the same situation as Netflix. I think they got there a little bit faster, but they're the only player in the game that really matters. And like you said, the game that they're playing is the only game that matters to them, and that is dominating audio, unlike some of their competitors. And so I think that Spotify, if you're going to be betting on Spotify, what you're betting on is the ability of this team, of this company to continue to expand, the user base, but also more importantly, I think, to continue to expand the dollars that they receive per user. And that can happen, in subscription fees, that can happen via audiobook downloads, expanded subscriptions, premium plans. I think they have plenty of room to grow on that front. Also, of course, the advertising dollars. So very similar to Netflix in that regard. And I think both companies at least for now, have shown us that they are by far the best in the space, some of the best companies at executing on a vision in the world. And so if you believe in that vision, these are companies that execute against it. Why not take a shot? I think that's why we've been bullish on Spotify for a long time and continue to be so.
Andy, when I look at a company like Spotify, the first thing that jumps into my head in terms of profitability is they're like the reverse Uber, which means they may have room to charge more, which Uber really doesn't. They may have room to pay their people less, which Uber can't. So even though Trevor Noah took a shot at Spotify last night for trying to make too much money, it looks like they've got room on both those. So as long as music stays popular, which it's as popular as it's ever been, do they have room to change those metrics to become more profitable?
Yeah, I think they absolutely do. In fact, I look at it as this is one of the few companies in the world that could probably do significantly better on both the revenue side and the expense side. They started cutting costs last year in both, some overhead costs, some personnel costs, and there was no negative impact on the user experience. In fact, the user experience, by many tokens got better. And at the same time, I think that they raised prices. They didn't see any meaningful pushback on that. LikeFolio consumer happiness numbers stayed very stable. And so I think they have room to expand the revenue side while continuing to cut the expense side. And that's a powerful place to be. And that's the promise, of all these companies we talk about all the time. It's when will they be profitable? The answer is always they're building out a platform. They're building out a user base. Once they get there, they can do these things to achieve high profitability. Well, Spotify is pretty much there. Netflix is pretty much there. And now they can start squeezing, and we'll see if those theories continue to work. For both those companies, we think the answer is yes. But, there's more to prove. There's always more to prove. And I think Netflix is ahead of Spotify in proving the pathway. And so Spotify just kind of has to follow that lead, in my opinion.
Andy, when we look at how this, expense plays out when it comes to music, isn't it also a situation where the Taylor Swifts of the world are like the John Rahms in golf, where they can get these massive contracts, but it's like at the impact of the guy who's ranked 68th in the world or 70th in the world that you don't know their name? If you're an up-and-coming artist, you just want to be on the platform. You might even pay to be on it to get that exposure. Where Taylor Swift says, I'm not on Spotify, I mean, their memberships could plummet by 20-30% overnight.
Yeah, it's the same. It works both ways. It worked with Joe Rogan. They bet on Joe Rogan. An exclusive deal took him away from YouTube, took him away from all of the other platforms where you could potentially listen to his podcast or watch it. And they put him on Spotify as an exclusive. I think it was a 10-figure deal. I can't remember exactly. It was an enormous deal, 100 million plus, I believe. And it worked. Everybody came over to Spotify. Everybody that's into podcasting came over to Spotify. And all of a sudden, they dominated the podcasting space. And like you said, now others just want to be on the platform. So I think they have a good history of going after those really important players and making sure that they're happy so that they can continue to expand their audience base. And so far, so good. I think Spotify knows this industry and this business better than anybody.
News reports that Joe Rogan just upped his deal with Spotify, and the rumors are as high as $250 million. Andy Swan, co-founder of LikeFolio.com. Thanks for coming on, as always, and sharing the LikeFolio.com data. Have a great day, Andy.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Alex, when we